I have several announcements that didn't get announced in the announcements. So I'm going to announce them now. First of all, Matt Russell is preaching at all three services today. And if you have not heard Matt preach, I encourage you to just walk across the plaza after this is over. Matt and I are doing something in the 11 o'clock service that I don't think has ever been done before. We are baptizing twin babies together. We're going to do it in tandem. So, anyway. So one announcement is that the happy hour is on the website, and when you read the instructions, you have instructions to park off the street because there's a lot of traffic there and there's a lot of parking available on either side and across the street. You've arranged that, so that's good. Second thing is that this Wednesday night, the boys and girls choristers of the Washington National Cathedral will be singing here in concert this Wednesday night, and the time is 7 o'clock. Is that right? 7 o'clock. And you will want to take advantage of that. It is free. The other big announcement, and I'm doing this here for you before this goes live on the internet, which it will do in 48 hours. But right now, you can go to the St. Paul's website and sign up for the Michael Dowd lecture that will be here in November. Yes, November. Rob's playing a benefit in October. So you go to the St. Paul's website, click on events, scroll all the way to the bottom of the events, and you will have an opportunity. You can even do it now. You are even doing it now. Okay, all right. You can fact check me too while I'm speaking. I'm very excited about Michael Dowd's being here. I have mentioned him to you before, and I will also reference him again next Sunday in his statement about creation and evidence being his scripture. But Michael Dowd is a very dynamic speaker. Many of you have read his book, Thank God for Evolution. You can go to his website. You can go to Ordinary Life website and find out more about him. But he will be here in the same format that Ilia Delio was, and I'm fairly confident that this event will sell out too. So if you want to attend this, come for that. Okay, that's it, I think. So remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. So, nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so we will fear less. This is not in the Bible. It should be. Versions of it are in the Bible. But these are words of Marie Curie, Madame Curie, who is the only person to have won 2 Nobel Peace Prizes for her work. She was known for her pioneering work in radiology, and she died from radiology poisoning of some kind, whatever. Now, of course, there are things in life that we need to be careful about and cautious of, but fear, irrational fear, is what is running and ruining our country at the moment. And I could list all the things that we're afraid of, but you've got your own list. You know what your fears are, and we have a tendency to tend them like a garden. We go out and make sure they're doing okay from time to time. One of the benefits of having a spiritual practice is that you begin to experience that in the present moment, there's nothing to be frightened of. Our fears usually descend upon us, or we upon them, when we leave the present moment and jump into the future. But in the present moment, there's nothing to be frightened of. And I have occasionally mentioned in here the importance of having a spiritual practice. And some folks are relatively new to this journey, and they're not really quite sure what a spiritual practice is. So I'm going to take just a smidgen time today to tell you what I think a spiritual practice involves. You ask some other teacher, and you would probably get another answer. But for me, at the time, a spiritual practice involves at least three things. First, some period of mindfulness where you stop and pay attention to what goes on in your brain. And you discover, if you do this, if you take up like a breathing exercise, that your mind has a mind of its own. And that you cannot focus on the present longer than that. And that we call it a practice because we practice getting back to the present moment and staying there, getting back to the present moment and staying there. And one of the teachers, Jack Cornfield, that I have relied on way in the past for Vipassana training, said that your mind it's like training a puppy to paper. All right? You put the dog on the paper and the dog goes away, and you gently bring it back and gently bring it back. And I know that when I took the Vipassana meditation, the 10-day training, I thought of what Jack had said. Jack's a Buddhist and a psychologist and very gentle, nice man. And I thought of that image of training the dog to paper, and I thought, you know, my karma ran over my dogma. Anyway. So you begin, I did give you a couple of ideas. I began my practice, breathing practice with bringing some words to mind. Words I got from Thich Nhat Hanh. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours are available to me. I commit to look at all beings with eyes of compassion and live each moment fully. And you see how well you do with that during the day. But at least it states your intention. At least it states your intention. Some lines that also I got from Buddhist teachings. The thought manifests as the word develops into deed, the deed hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care and let it spring from love. Let it spring from love for all beings. It's a good one, too. Watch the thought. Or you can do this, the prayer of St. Francis that we mentioned in here. Whatever you do, it's something that declares your intention for the day. Just declares what you want that day to be about, and then you go live that day. We want to learn to be an observer to our thoughts and not owned by them. So we practice noticing the unruly nature of our mind, and then just trying to live with that. A second component of spiritual practice involves some intellectual stimulation, and here your resources are endless. Read to increase your religious or spiritual literacy. Okay, you don't like to read. You don't have to. You can listen now. On your device, you can listen to podcasts. There's a wealth of stuff out there. Listen to Krista Tippett on being. Get books that I mentioned in here from Audible. A lot of the books that you buy now from Amazon have the capacity to be read to you from your device. You can listen to them in the car. I do that. I recommend that. I'm listening to a course now, a great course on redefining reality. It's so much better than listening to the news when you drive around. Really, I'm serious. And the third component of spiritual practice is doing some act of compassion that moves the planet, at least the part of it where you live, a little bit further toward an embodiment of love and justice for the nature. So you have a way to review and to hold yourself accountable to how and where peace, love, and joy show up in your life, in the concrete relations that you have with yourself and with other people in your life, and have someone that you can talk to about this. Your partner, a spiritual director, some friend, to check in with how's it going with you in these areas. Buddhism's Eightfold Path is a wonderful manual on constructing a life of love and compassion and kindness, just paying attention. All this information is out there on the web. Now, I want this talk, as well as all talks in here, to embrace all three of these elements every time we get together. And to be of practical value to you in the living of your life. Now, unfortunately, we can't look to classical Christianity. You can if you go back far enough, and you go into the period where St. Teresa, Meister Eckhart, John of the Cross, some of these people lived and did their work, but those works have not even been easily accessible to us until recently. If you want to find something that's taking place in the Christian tradition, you have to go to a parastructure. You have to go, this is sad, but usually, now it's changing, but you have to go to somebody like Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation and get involved in that in the various ways that you could. Or Thomas Keating's work, you take advantage of that. There has, thank God, been a renaissance over the last few years of this kind of work for people who are interested in it. Christian fundamentalist has focused mostly on creedal, moralistic issues. And these creedal things, moralistic issues, can be created out of any religion. And this tends to lead to an emphasis on the negative, the shameful, making people feel guilty about themselves, making them feel fearful. Carl Jung said, Christian civilization has proved hollow to a terrifying degree. Too few people have experienced the divine image as the innermost possession of their souls. Well, next week we're going to talk about what it means to be embraced by the sacred. So, in my own exposure to what some people are calling the new physics, I am struck by how much of it is preoccupied with the subject and matter of light. I mean, a lot of it starts in the study of energy and light. Albert Einstein said, for the rest of my life, I want to reflect on what light is. Now, there are many creation myths from all over the globe. And one of the things that they all have in common is that they consider light to be one of the basic or first features of the emerging universe. Light. Light symbolizes many things. It symbolizes radiance, warmth, clarity, enormous power. I have frequently used an image of an iceberg to say something about who we are, that there is only about this much of us above the surface of the water. Everything else is under here, the unconscious. I got another image that I also use, and this one is helpful for what we're going to talk about today. You can imagine the human psyche is made up of what is conscious to us. Then we have the ego. Under that, we have what is personally unconscious to us. The unconscious simply means we don't know what we don't know. It's not a secret that we're keeping. We don't know what is at the level of the unconscious. And yet, here's today's talk in a sentence, it frequently makes tremendous decisions for us, both individually and corporately. And under this is the collective unconscious. So if you could imagine a sea full of icebergs, underneath the surface of the sea, we're all connected in that collective unconscious aspect. Now, at this point in our evolution, we are in serious need of the light. We need more people who are enlightened with new ways of connecting to the sacred. Actually, they're not new ways. Jesus clearly enunciated them in his vision of a new world order, which he called the rule of God. And though there are many ways to describe this rule, the primary traits are our willingness to give up control, our willingness to get the ego off to the side, a willingness not to win, not to be right, but just to be and be connected. Now, the primary word, as I said, to describe this is the rule of God. And in the religions of the world, it is referred to as light. And it's what we all long for. It is what brought you into this room today. We want to be enlightened. We're also terrified of it, but that's what we want. The light speaks to our need for the resolution of pain and suffering. I've just lifted some phrases out of the tradition. May there be light in our darkness. That speaks of the presence, sacred presence in our midst. The light has come into the world. That's the way Jesus is spoken of, a light that has come into the world. This light promises a path to truth and joy. Be a light unto my feet. Now, if you look around, you will see pretty clearly, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, that we need to reawaken to the God of surprises, to the light that shines even in our present darkness, that no darkness can extinguish. And this is the ongoing goal of spiritual practice. Now, I spoke to you last week about the gospel of inclusion. And I said that if we lived in a rational world, the news of inclusion would be met with gratitude and relief. There's likely nothing more terrifying than the thought of standing before some judgmental, angry deity who has his finger on a button that will open the trap door you are standing on and send you straight into into the lake of eternal fire. However, if you, and I keep bringing this up because people will say to me on a regular basis, you know, you couldn't say what you say in every church. I know that, but I just want to get you to think, why is that? If you go preach the gospel of inclusion in a lot of places, you're likely to get some pushback. And the basic objection to the gospel of inclusion goes something like this. If everyone is saved, how can people be punished for their sins? There seems to be a hunger, which we'll talk about later today, on the part of a lot of people who call themselves Christian for other people to be punished. Now, there are some people who claim that this is an innate human trait. I do not believe that. I think that the evolutionary process itself points clearly to the cooperative nature of things, or we wouldn't be here. People, elements and species have had to figure out ways to work together in order to survive as a group. Now, if the desire for punishment of others is an innate human trait, religion seems only to magnify it. By the way, when Jesus and other spiritual mystics teach the importance of not judging, they are not dismissing the importance of accountability. Accountability, or karma, if you want to call it that, underscores the responsibility for answering how we live our lives. Now, for a faith that is supposed to be based on the great hope of the light I have been speaking about so far today, Christian fundamentalism is obsessed with darkness. Zionism, which is why Christian evangelical movement in this country is so excited about the appointment of an embassy in Jerusalem, is about the end of the world. where there will be a great apocalyptic war, and just a few people are going to make it safely to the other side of that. The others of us are going to be in big trouble. And there seems to be kind of a glee about this, you know. So we live in a time, in a country where there seems to be implicit support for hate groups directed at others, like homosexuals or people of color. A gleeful damnation of anyone who does not agree with their particular brand of Christianity. We live in a time where the explicitness of racism seems to have had the lid that was somewhat containing it removed. How did this come to be? Now, I hope you're able to recall some of what we've already talked about in this theme. The most vocal people in the monotheistic traditions today, and I think this is probably reflexively true for most people, are inside a religious system that is based on a belief on a male God who is ruling off from a distance somewhere outside the realm of human activity. And this sky God requires, among other things, submission. And this submission is not something that leads to empowerment. Further, most people are not aware of the effect this belief has over him. Our image of God, conscious to us or not, determines the image we have of ourselves, and it shapes our behavior. If our God can destroy, so can we. If God can dominate, so can we, and so forth. And there's a huge need to and competition about domination and control on our planet right now. Now, I know that on the surface, we say, or people say, I don't want to strike too close to home. I know that we say that we believe in a God of unconditional love. That's the claim. God is love. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. I grew up in a church that taught that. I grew up in a church where I was taught to sing in Sunday school, Jesus loves the little children of the world, black and yellow, brown and white. They are precious in his sight. And that culture lynched black people. So that this generous, loving God is not the first thing that comes to mind when people think of God. For most people, God evokes fear. For most people, Jesus is seen as irrelevant. And for most people, religion is seen as a passive activity, not an active undertaking where we contribute to the well-being of the world. Now, I think that we have an inherited wisdom about unconditional love, just like we have an inherited evolutionary wisdom about cooperation, but we get cut off from it very easily. I don't know where I first heard this, maybe from Richard Rohr. But there exists today a great confusion between the power of love and the love of power. I do know that the love of power has seriously undermined the power of love. I do know that the reassurance of the love of inclusion, of which I spoke last week and I will continue to speak, is something that is simply not available to many people in their daily life unless they take up a spiritual practice. It is living into the inclusive love of God that more than any other single thing empowers people to be who we truly are. Our culture of fierce competition and resentments and jealousies is so problematic to this kind of life and living. Now, if you hear me being critical of fundamentalism, you are hearing me correctly. I want to deconstruct it because it's so detrimental to what's going on our globe today. The fact is, however, that if you look at religion in general, at the long history of the Christian religion from the 4th century until now, religion has been damaging to people. It has been damaging to our globe. Religion itself, more than any other single thing, has hurt the belief in a loving, safe God. Carlton Pearson, a man I referenced last week, said that he had a dream in which he heard the voice of God speaking to him in a heartbroken way, and God was saying, Carlton, people don't like me. People are afraid of me because of the way you have presented me. Now, I know I could, and you could too, stand here and cite all the good that religion has accomplished in the world. It has safeguarded wisdom, it's brought order, meaning, encouragement, a sense of community, it's provided healthcare, education, social services. I agree. But even this has been done in a way that does not often lead to liberation and empowerment, and that's what I want to try to address in this talk today. And if we're going to do that, we have to be willing, before we can see the light, to go into the dark. One of the things that is true about mystics is that they see things the rest of us don't see. They're called seers, right? In the Jewish prophetic tradition, that's what they're called, seers. And Jesus was part of that Jewish prophetic tradition. He saw that his Judaism needed reforming. And so they help people, these prophets, these mystics, see things they could not see before. And I mentioned before, this business of having eyes and not seeing, the healing of the blind stories in the Jesus narratives constitute a major metaphor for the spiritual journey. Now, one of the things that we do not see about ourselves, either individually or collectively, is what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow. The shadow is that part of ourselves that we don't want to see, we don't want others to see. It is that part of us that we deny. This doesn't operate for me. It might be true for somebody else, but it's not true for me. You know, there's a saying you sometimes hear in our culture that says, what you don't know won't hurt you. That's a lie. What you don't know runs you. Carl Jung said the meeting with oneself at first is the meeting with one's own shadow. The shadow is a tight passage, a narrow door whose painful constriction no one is spared who goes down to the deep well, but one must learn to know oneself in order to know who one is. Now, I want to get on the table something that's true about you and about me every time we meet here. And that is that we bring into this gathering, I do and you do, two big fears every time we gather. The first is the fear that nothing will happen. I've wasted my time. I would have been better reading the New York Times. The fire didn't strike. I wasn't any good today. They didn't like it. Whatever. That's a fear that we all have. Nothing will happen. The other fear that we have is that something will happen. And that fear is that we will get dislodged from our comfortable way of thinking and believing, that we will see something about us, our group, our political party, our church, our country that we don't want to see, and we leave ticked off. You know what I was about to say, don't you? So the shadow that we all carry and live in is not itself evil or bad. It is what allows us to do evil without seeing it or calling it evil. An unarmed black man is shot in the back by a white police officer. The white police officer is not a bad person. That officer is just in the grips of something, captured by something that has caused him to behave in a very damaging way. I don't have this in my notes, but I was going to say that if there's anybody in this room who is not aware of ever having been captured, come see me. We all get captured. You know the guy who cut you off on the freeway? The white jury that proclaimed that police officer innocent after seeing the video of him shooting the man in the back also is captured. As is the culture that makes this sort of thing possible. My favorite example of being captured is Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. If we had walked in on them in the White House when they were undertaking their project and had said to them, "What in God's name are you two people thinking?" The honest answer would have been, "We're not." Because they had been captured. So spiritual growth, spiritual practice is working. We can't avoid being captured, but it's working to make sure that we are captured less frequently, with less intensity, and with less duration. That is a realistic goal. The denial of operating out of our shadow side is why Jesus criticizes hypocrisy more than any other single thing. Many people are very surprised to have this pointed out, but you just go read the Jesus narratives. Jesus is never upset with sinners, ever. He only gets upset with people who think they are not sinners. Now, the religion that many of us grew up with saw the shadow as a problem. So it focused on getting rid of faults. It focused on morality. Don't play cards, don't dance, don't smoke, don't go with girls that do. Didn't focus on the origin of the symptom. So we're not trying to get rid of the shadow. We're trying to acknowledge it, expose its game. Low-level religion almost always focuses on the shadow. The narcissistic structure of the self remains totally in control and unexposed. So what we want to do in our spiritual work, to build a viable container for the future, we're going to have to see and deconstruct the shadow aspects of current religious structures for what they are. And there are at least 4 shadow elements. I probably could list more than this, but I'm going to list 4 today that you can find in all of the world's major religions. I'm focusing primarily on Christianity, but you will find these in Judaism. You will find this in Islam. You will find this to some degree in Buddhism, certainly in Zen, and a lot of others. But I want to speak about these 4 things briefly because they affect us so much. These are shadows. These are things we don't see, and if we do glimpse them, we have such great ways of rationalizing why they are in place. The first is the patriarchal foundation on which the religion is built. God is depicted as this mighty ruler, a king-like figure, usually ruling from above, someone who is outside the world. And part of this shadow element of the patriarchal structure of religion is belief that the world and the people on it are sinful, that the world and the people in it are flawed. There's something wrong with you. And the cultural paradigm of male power has been and is so much taken for granted that many people fail to realize its grip on us. Some even see this as a God-ordained way to run the world. So you have gender inequality being taken as just boy, it's the way it is. Just the way it is. Ain't gonna change. Racism is also a huge consequence of this because the world is or ought to be run by white guys. And that they are rich white guys goes without saying. The disempowered never get to participate in this. Now, some of the consequences of keeping this in place are the normalization, the acceptance of violence. If I have to stay in power, I got to make sure you're not. The priority of the ruling male, making losers invisible and concealing what about the system we don't want people to see. The second shadow aspect that has exerted enormous power over shaping both our religious and non-religious culture is what I mentioned earlier, and that's the notion of a flawed creation. A message of the church, not as explicit as I'm putting it now, although it certainly has been. I've seen it that way. But the message of the church is, there's something wrong with you. I got the secret. I can make it better. If you give me your money, you admit to my rules, you join my club, and behave yourself. A grown-up expression of religion informs us that it's not humans nor the earth that is flawed, it's the patriarchy itself. The third shadow aspect is the aspect of obedience and submission. I call this obey the rules. The shadow teaching says something like this: if you want to be saved, you've got to swear allegiance to certain conditions, beliefs, and rules. Think about this. Those people on earth, and we elect them to high positions in our government, but those people on earth that demand that we do not criticize them, that they are never wrong, we see that as having a character disorder. But it's okay to have a God like that. I demand your praise. I demand your obedience. What God invites is collaboration. All right? This shadow side doesn't produce mature adults. It produces childlike dependence. It produces obedience. And perhaps the worst perversion of this in our time and culture is what is called the prosperity gospel. God will bless you if you give me your money. By the way, I picked out another jet. So So you heard the story of the televangelist who wants a Falcon FX, the $54 million airplane that Jesus told him to get. And he said on television, I heard with my own ears this, do you think if Jesus were here, he would ride on a donkey? No, he'd ride a Falcon FX jet. The preacher already has 5 others.
We'll get the financial committee working on it.
Okay, I'm waiting. You know how much time I got? I think that the symbol of being incredibly wealthy is having your own jet. Because not only do you have your jet, you have to have a crew to fly it, you have to have insurance to pay for it, you have to have money to maintain it, you have to have a place to keep it, and you have to have a fancy place to go to when you get in it. Perhaps the most devastating shadow aspect of both our culture and religion has to do with the belief in and role of redemptive violence. It shows up in the early church in the beginning. It shows up in the Middle Ages and the Crusades. And it is based on the notion of the theistic God created about 80,000 years ago after the agricultural revolution, where there is a game clearly of winners and losers, and God is on somebody's side. And if you lose, then you are unworthy, and you better live in fear of the more powerful people. You think this may not affect us, but think about it. We numb our intelligence to the realization that we have a nuclear arsenal. We are committed to spending billions of dollars updating. If we took half of that money, we'd take care of the poverty problem. We'd take care of the hunger problem in this country overnight. But we are committed to spending billions of dollars updating this arsenal that has the capacity to destroy the world several times over. We are immersed in a cultural death wish in having given this power to world leaders who behave like 3-year-old children. Now, this theme that I have undertaken, living in the gap between the no longer and the not yet, is an effort to address the inherited dysfunctional aspects of religion. And what you hear me saying, I want to be clear, is a conversation that's taking place in a lot of places in this country and around the world. There are a lot of groups like this. Richard Orr would be an example. There are Shane Claiborne's, there are Jim Finley's, there are people who are having these kinds of informed conversations. We're so fortunate that this gets to occur here. I think the decline of organized religion in our time is a symptom that people are distancing themselves from these things. They don't want a part of it. They want another way of thinking about a viable, mature, adult Christianity or faith that can help them relate to other people and be in the world in a meaningful way, so that on our deathbed we can say, God, I'm glad I spent my life that way. Now, I know that various attempts of organized religion have attempted to address this situation. Churches are trying to be more relevant. They're trying to be friendlier. They're trying to use mass media more effectively, make worship more attractive, improve their social image, be more inclusive, but the basic model hasn't changed. No matter, for example, what the Roman Catholic Church attempts to do in this arena, nobody doubts who has the last word in that church, or that women will ever be ordained. That's okay. And the same thing is true with Protestant expressions of the Christian church, such as the United Methodist. The church simply seems to be out of touch with its laity on the main issues like inclusion, the LGBT issue, and other things. Fundamentalist religion uses guilt and fear to maintain faithfulness and submission to a patriarchal, controlling God whose will for its adherents is access through a literal interpretation of the Bible, and those who rule based on the interpretation of that Bible. And this keeps people from feeling fearless, worthy. Now, I've only held up a few of the shadow aspects we're affected by. Culturally, we are all part of an unjust system. One focused on greed, a culture that is racist. We've got our own form of domination in place. Wisdom and understanding are essential for the transformation we say we seek. And one of the ways we gain wisdom is in the process of understanding that there are these unknown, repressed, denied, split off aspects of our own personalities that have a life of their own, and they rob us of energy for our consciously living lives of peace, love, and joy, loving kindness and compassion. Until we acknowledge them, they obligate us to serve tribal gods and rules rather than allowing us to be in the present moment with our options wide open. What we don't address openly, honestly, and with a willingness to move in the direction of our stated values will play out in our lives somewhere, somehow. Not only for us as individuals, but for us as a group, as a church, as a political party, as a denomination, as a country. So I want to say, please understand, I love, respect, and appreciate the family that birthed me. I love and appreciate the church that gave me love, teaching, and grounding. I love this wonderful country in which I am so privileged to live. And I don't want that love, respect, and appreciation to blind me to the shadow aspects of any of it. Such blindness has had and is having enormous costs for people of color, for women, for gays, for lesbians. Our cultural distraction causes the vast majority of citizens in this country, especially those who have the power to make a difference, to live with so little awareness of what is really going on. The rule of God Jesus taught was about seeing the world and those who inhabit it as God sees. The religion of our culture, which is consumerism, promises perpetual light and ease, particularly if you are a Prime customer. The cosmic truth about life, though, is that difficulty, pain, loss, patience, discipline, waiting, anxiety, and even death are not only necessary, but also these things are primary ingredients for growth. Joy, peace, meaning, rest, play, security, and love are also ingredients for growth, but they depend on their opposites in order to appear. Stars are available for us to see them, but we cannot see them if we do not go into the dark. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step, and I will see you here next week. And don't forget to sign up for Michael Dowd. Thank you.